Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ellen Stitt, founder and director of Rein It In, and I will be the host and moderator of today's webinar. Before we get started, I would like to provide you with a bit of information about Rein It In. Rein It In is a new national nonprofit and annual competition that invites post-secondary students in Ontario to form multidisciplinary teams and create innovative solutions that mitigate the impacts that intense rainfall events have on our communities. The concept of Rein It In was created in September 2018 through my participation in a water innovation lab, otherwise known as a WIL. WILs are facilitated by the organization Waterlution and are front-running immersive leadership trainings designed to accelerate collaborative innovation, fast-track global knowledge sharing, and devise new innovations that improve water security. WIL supports emerging leaders aged 18 to 35 to implement Sustainable Development Goal targets, otherwise known as SDG, connected to water both in their organizations and their projects. WIL develops future water leaders to think holistically, design innovatively, and communicate effectively across cultures. In January 2019, I launched the pilot project in partnership with Durham College. 12 teams competed from 5 Ontario post-secondary institutions: the University of Toronto, the University of Waterloo, Ryerson University, Centennial College, and Durham College participated. This brings us to where we are currently with the full launch of Rein It In. The registration deadline has been extended to Sunday, October 27th, 2019, so please share this opportunity with any students who you feel would be interested in participating. If you'd like to learn more, I invite you to visit our website. You can also stay connected by following Rein It In on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Today's webinar is being hosted in partnership with our webinar partner, the Canadian Water Network, or CWN for short. CWN is Canada's trusted broker of insights of the water sector. Through their Canadian Municipal Water Consortium, CWN undertakes initiatives that accelerate, advance, and improve municipal water management decisions. Their work focuses on helping decision makers in water management move forward by making sense of what's important and where there are knowledge gaps, laying out the available options, trade-offs, and opportunities, and increasing clarity and confidence to make informed decisions. My relationship with CWN is very special to me as I started my volunteer journey in the water sector with them. I was a webinar coordinator on their 2017-2018 Student and Young Professionals Committee, and I am so grateful for that opportunity that has since opened so many doors for me. So we know that intense rainfall events have negative impacts on our communities and the environment, but what are those negative impacts? Before we can begin to find solutions to a problem, we must first understand it. This webinar has been designed to explore these negative impacts with 3 different perspectives: conservation, wastewater management, and insurance. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest speakers. Our first speaker, Nick Reed, is Executive Director of Ryerson Urban Water, or RUW, with a focus on achieving healthy and sustainable urban water cycles through applied research, education and outreach, and supportive policy. He is a long-standing member of the American Waterworks Association and currently the Vice President of the Ontario Waterworks Association. Previously, Nick held senior roles as an Executive and Vice President of the Ontario Clean Water Agency, including responsibility for the day-to-day operations of Peel Region's water and wastewater plants, serving over 1.2 million residents. Nick is a graduate of Trent University, where his studies included environmental science and biology. Eric Millison utilizes 12-plus years experience in facilitating the implementation of sustainable water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure for the Partners in Project Green program for the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. Eric assists with stakeholder engagement, partnership development, and the execution of corporate social responsibility objectives directly with the business and governmental community. Anjit Bamwala is one of Toronto's leading insurance professionals with over 7 years of experience in the commercial and residential insurance industry, and has made it his mission to ensure that his clients receive the highest level of service and support, and that they receive an insurance solution designed specifically to meet their needs. Active in the local community and in many industrial professional groups, or industry professional groups, he holds both the Canadian Risk Management and the Chartered Insurance Professional designations. This year, 2019, he also completed the CAIB designation. Always seeking knowledge, personal and professional enlightenment, on as an avid reader, podcast follower, and volunteer. So with that, I would like to ask Nick to begin his presentation.
Thanks very much, Alan. I'm Nick Reed, Executive Director of Ryerson Urban Water, and I'm pleased to be able to frame the Rain It In challenge from the municipal stakeholder perspective. I'll be talking about the impacts of severe weather on infrastructure, especially water and wastewater systems, the different types of flooding, and governance around managing stormwater. I've borrowed a number of images and graphics from other speakers, and so I've noted this on the bottom of my slides. Communities across North America are dealing with changes in weather. And while some jurisdictions are facing drought and increased forest fire risk, the challenge more locally is intense rainfall of shorter duration. Since 2002, Toronto has experienced 3 severe storms of the intensity that would be expected once in 50 years. So impacts on the subway system, electricity grids, and surface transportation are all evident. The August 7th storm system over Toronto caused flooding and power outages across the city. Emergency crews were called to rescue people trapped in basement elevators where doors didn't open. Folks were trapped in water that was neck deep. And the storm was slow moving and hovered over the city, fueled by winds blowing off of Lake Ontario. Consequently, the city had a month's worth of rain in a few hours. Weather forecasters were caught off guard by the storm because of the way that the various local conditions came together in such a slow-moving system, and how these factors come together is still not a phenomenon that's well understood. There are a number of different types of flooding. In this example here, we see riverine flooding. This is when the volume of stormwater is such that a river or stream crests over its banks onto adjacent lands. Because it's not unusual for infrastructure like roadways and rail tracks to be built alongside rivers, you get circumstances where the adjacent infrastructure for transportation is underwater, making it impassable. In such circumstances, any infrastructure that's on the floodplain is at risk. So if any of the participants on the call today know of Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto as an example, it's been flooded numerous times because it's built on the floodplain. And over the course of time, they've learned strategies to mitigate the damage that results. 2 more types of flooding. On the left-hand side, we see urban overland flooding. Conventional gray infrastructure, which is comprised of hard surfaces and pipes, are overwhelmed by the volume of water in localized areas, putting these low-lying areas such as underpasses at risk and making them unpassable. On the right side is the sanitary sewer backup. This happens when the volume of water in the sewage collection system exceeds the capacity of the hydraulics of the system to deal with it. Consequently, the water backs up to higher and higher elevations. When the backup elevation is higher than the level of the drains in people's basement, the water flows backwards into the basement. While this can be prevented with a backwater valve, many homes in Toronto and other municipalities do not have this. This problem is generally more severe when a community has combined sewers that convey both sanitary waste and rainwater, and I'll explain that in the following slides. This is an example of 2 types of wastewater collection systems generally found in municipalities. On the left is a combined system. You can see that the water from the parking lot has a path into the sewage pipe. And note that the larger pipe on the left has a dam just by its outfall to the creek. The dam is meant to prevent water from overflowing into the creek. The separated system on the right, where the water from the parking lot has a dedicated pipe, is separate from the sanitary pipe. In dry weather or in light rain, both systems work well, and sewage does not escape into the environment. Now here's an example of the 2 wastewater collection systems during heavy rains. On the left-hand side, you can see that water from the parking lot is mixing with the sewage, and the volume of water is so large that it overflows the dam at the end of the pipe. Consequently, sewage is able to get into the environment. This is called a combined system overflow. On the right-hand side, the water from the parking lot does not mix with the sewage, and only rainwater makes its way to the creek. It's important to note, though, that any contamination from the parking lot has a direct line into the creek. This slide shows how the intense rainfall impacts interrelated services. Point 1 represents the combined sewer, allowing sewage to enter the water body. Point 2 graphically represents the intake of a drinking water treatment plant. Consequently, the source water is more contaminated and will require additional treatment. Point 3 shows riverine flooding of roadways, preventing emergency responders from getting where they are needed to be. And point 4 demonstrates how combined sewer overflows contaminate water, which results in a public health reach due to contamination of beaches and waterways. The impacts of stormwater are actually much more than flooding. And I mentioned on the previous slide they affect water quality. On the top here is a graph from one sample location that shows the interrelation between water level on the right-hand scale and turbidity on the left-hand scale. High turbidity is associated with waterborne pathogens and requires additional treatment. The middle graphic on the bottom is difficult to see, but each piece of the pie represents individual pathogens such as Giardia, Cryptosporidium, Campylobacter, Salmonella, E. coli, and others that can make their way into the environment due to intense flooding. Other impacts of severe weather include the fact that planners have to consider how rising water levels impact their emergency response scenarios. In this example on the left shows a flooding parking lot, and Christine Zimmer from Credit Valley Conservation was kind enough to share this. Part of the emergency plan in this instance was where an adjacent school had to evacuate in an emergency response. The muster point was, in fact, in the parking lot. So obviously, the emergency planners did not consider the opportunity of a flood being the disaster scenario. So this is definitely not a good meeting point for school children. In the second slide, in the middle, you can see that erosion can play a critical role in making transportation unsafe. In the center image, the rail bed under a train track is washed out. This creates the risk of a possible derailment and all of the consequences that go with that. Lastly, I'd like to point out that there's a disparity along economic lines with respect to flooding. So the individual on the right-hand side was a tenant in a basement apartment. Often tenants in basement apartments are less financially secure, yet they're the ones that are most likely to be displaced by a basement flood. Impacts continue with environmental degradation. People should bear in mind that anything that gets flushed can make its way into the environment. All of these things and more can be found along our waterways. So you might ask yourself, well, how does this happen? Well, I previously mentioned the idea of combined sewer overflows, but there are other ways that sewage and trash make their way into the environment. A common way is due to hydraulic overload. When the volume of water overwhelms the capacity of the system to treat it, the water has to go somewhere. So it comes out of the system through maintenance holes in the form of sewer overflows. Another way sewage gets into the environment is due to a treatment plant bypass. This is an action taken by a treatment plant operator. It's in order to prevent sewer backups into basements or sewer overflows. The operators can actually divert some of the volume around the sewage treatment plant. So this is known as a plant bypass. It's bypassing the treatment process. As mentioned, this is done to prevent sewers flooding into basements. It's also done to prevent the sewage treatment plant process itself from being washed out. And this is a circumstance in which the sewage plant itself can be damaged and flooded. There are a number of governance challenges related to managing stormwater. Like many things that relate to climate, water, stormwater does not know municipal boundaries. So there are many stakeholders at play here, and figuring out who does what and who pays for what is challenging. Private homeowners, obviously they're responsible for their properties and things like grading around their homes. is important for preventing basement floodings. The province is responsible for regulations and guidance on stormwater management. Municipalities have to abide by these regulations, but you can have multiple tiers of municipalities, and the lower tier will typically deal with stormwater, and the upper tier will deal with drinking water treatment, wastewater treatment, and the big pipes that convey water and wastewater. And at the floodplain level, you have conservation authorities dealing with water there. So you can see it's a very complex governance scenario, and figuring out whose responsibility is what is challenging. So like this popular carnival game, there are a number of problems that pop up when it comes to stormwater management. Back in the day, engineers thought it'd be great to manage flooding using combined sewers. They never anticipated the water volumes they'd face and the water quality challenges that would pop up. So I hope this gives you some insight into the impacts of flooding on municipal infrastructure, especially water and wastewater management. I'm with Ryerson Urban Water, 44 experts focused on research, education, and policy, all for a healthy urban water cycle. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick, for sharing your perspectives on wastewater and municipal infrastructure and the other barriers that these intense rainfall events have. I just wanted to let everybody know there is an opportunity at the end of this webinar if you would like to ask any of our three speakers questions about the content they've presented today. So on the top left corner, there's a Q&A box. So if you want to put your questions in there, we can definitely take a look at them at the end of the webinar. And with that, I'm going to let Eric take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to have a little bit of a treat here. We're going to be talking about intense rainfall events and their impact to watersheds to follow up on Nick's presentation. Presentation is actually going to be a combination of content that was provided from our flood risk management team, our Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program team, and Partners in Project Green's Water Stewardship team, which I belong to. To start off, on the flood risk management side, we wanted to understand how flood risk in our jurisdiction and understanding the nature of flood risks in our areas. As you can see from this slide, there is a lot of risk distributed. The green space in our jurisdiction of TRCA is braided across our jurisdiction corresponds to the ravines of our system and our rivers. Our flood risk is peppered across 9 watersheds, 10 if you actually count Frenchman's Bay. And we have mapped the floodplains for these river systems, but we need to recall that our region was developed before we implemented land use for hazard management. On the next slide, I wanted to highlight that there really isn't a season for flooding as typically is known. So we have spring and summer where there's a lot of rainfall. There's usually a lot of rainfall all throughout the 4 seasons. When rain falls on the ground or snow melts, the water either infiltrates the soil or becomes surface flow, also known as runoff. Surface flow rapidly travels over land and through storm sewers, reaching water courses and causing water levels within the rivers to rise quickly. Factors that contribute to flooding include the amount of surface runoff as well as characteristics of the watershed, which Nick alluded to as well. Due to the urban nature of the Greater Toronto Area, much rainfall becomes runoff, which causes water levels in streams and rivers to rise quickly, which usually is a characteristic of flash flooding. We touched upon riverine flooding, so I won't go too much into that. Riverine flooding falls under the mandate of conservation authorities, while urban flooding is the responsibility of municipalities. So Nick's previous slide about governmental oversight, that's kind of related to what we're talking about here. On the next slide as well, we're looking at the different, divisional responsibilities in terms of dealing with floods. So as you can see, federal, provincial government, conservation authorities, municipalities, leading all the way up to home residents and private residents have responsibility with regards to flood risk management. So our flood risk management team wanted to showcase where we get involved. So we have broken out 4 out of 5 phases of emergency management: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and response and recovery. We've made some great strides at the TRCA to allow for this program to accelerate and get us much closer to where we want to be. We are having ongoing comparison of gauges then and now. We're looking at different projects in terms of work that needs to be done. We have our next generation flood forecasting and warning system, an integrated common operating picture of what's typically happening today and what needs to be done in the future. On slide number 8, implementing floodplain management practices is actually a primary tool in reducing our overall flood risk within our jurisdiction. Through developing hydrological models, we understand the impacts of land use changes to our watersheds, quantify peak flows that happen within our hydraulic models, and develop stormwater management targets so that new development and redevelopment plans can actually support the natural flows of our rivers, which is what is intended. We also operate and maintain the suite of flood control infrastructure, and when we talk overall about trying to reduce the flood risk to these clusters, mitigation projects are on the way, and they are the goal overall, but in the long term, they require continued investment. With regard to flood risk management on a preparedness side, we usually try to coordinate IMS, emergency management plans and protocols, and risk communication and public outreach. So you hear us on the news a lot in terms of radio and television. We kind of serve as the difference between risk communication and crisis communication. With regards to flood response, the Conservation Authority role is clear. We monitor the watershed and weather conditions and operate a flood forecasting and warning system. We issue flood messages and operate Conservation Authority dams and flood control structures. We provide technical advice to municipalities and maintain communications with municipalities and other agencies during these times. With regards to recovery, what I wanted to highlight here is that our flood risk management team, we really can't catch them all. Every flood event that happens annually is an opportunity to learn. So we are focused on impact tracking, post-event analysis, quite a bit of data collection, and implementation of lessons learned. So in jumping to our Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program, which is the next slide, this team's work is actually in terms of identifying and accelerating adoption of sustainable best practices. So around the loop there, monitoring and evaluating, providing guidance and tools to the industry, allow for and provide outreach and training, and assess overall barriers for implementation. What's exciting about this team is they have a free reference source for people who want to learn more about stormwater management, best practices, and low-impact development technologies. And it's this wiki that they developed, so a low-impact development and planning design guide. So that's the link up there. It's actually a coordinated effort between Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, Credit Valley Conservation, and TRCA. Through our STEP program. And so this is quite an exciting model for you to allow for access to current information about innovation, about implementation case studies, about any guidance that the STEP team has actually developed. Some examples on the next set of slides are what's actually on the website. So the treatment train tool allows you to effectively design a conceptual treatment train and see what types of installation technologies could be utilized. This is a high-level guidance, so it's not necessarily set in stone, but it allows you to develop a model in real time of what you could actually utilize. The focus areas of our wiki is in urban runoff and low-impact development implementation, finding ways to address erosion and sediment control, utilization of natural features and systems, which is underutilized. And then within our STEP team, they're also looking at energy efficiency and renewables within the industry. So the rest of the slides within the STEP team are looking at different examples of our living laboratory practice. So installations that they've either helped implement or build or are monitoring currently within the municipality jurisdiction. So permeable pavements is slide 16. So bioretention and infiltration trenches, some soil management applications. And I wanted to highlight there before I jump into the work from Partners in Project Green side is that the folks from the STEP side are constantly providing new content and educational and awareness opportunities. So the folks at the end of this presentation are definitely people to reach out to from both flood management and our STEP team to learn more about what's offered. From the water stewardship side of Partners in Project Green, our program within the Toronto Region Conservation Authority is actually built to help the municipalities within our jurisdiction engage the private sector on conservation and stewardship initiatives, including water. In our 2019 membership, we've reached about 80 members of both public and private institutions throughout the jurisdiction. As you can see, a lot of national, multinational companies that are out there. But we've been trying to engage them on addressing green infrastructure. So we have a green infrastructure program that's been running for about 5 years now. It's helping with the business case of implementation of stormwater management and on-site green infrastructure implementation for the private sector. In doing so, we've established 3 sub-programs, which is focused on implementation of LID technology primarily. Rainwater harvesting systems, green roofs, and permeable pavement has been our focus. We've been also stepping into allowing for companies to work within establishing natural infrastructure, which is a new method and approach for us from a corporate engagement side. And in doing so, we've developed a industry vendor network of credible institutions and companies and vendor providers and solution providers within the jurisdiction that actually provide low-impact development, best practices, and solutions in the area. So we have a vendor network that's available that allows for a reference of understanding which technologies to potentially use, which engineers to potentially hire, which speeds up the implementation process in support of a business case for the business sector. The next set of slides, the last 4, are related to projects that we've done over the last 5 years. And so we have a bunch of green infrastructure case studies. We did a filter swale with the Brampton County Court, with the City of Brampton and our SNAP program, Sustainable Neighborhood Retrofit Action Plan, out of the TRCA. We helped spearhead a on-site LID implementation of a ponds project, so infiltration ponds, a drainage area on-site at a furniture manufacturer out in Scarborough. So this was a large-scale implementation of converting their entire rooftop rainwater and on-site runoff to infiltrate on-site. And so they're completely off the grid in terms of stormwater capacity for the typical storms that happen. That project actually led to an engagement pilot with the TRCA and the Toronto District School Board, where we actually built a neighborhood improvement area pollinator habitat with the Toronto Catholic District School Board, in this case for St. Thomas More Catholic School. And similarly, Calstone actually donated $45,000 to help with a business community project with the TRCA and the Toronto District School Board at Tom Longboat to put in a rain garden and a pollinator habitat to also infiltrate water. So that's actually the outdoor learning circle that the school has on site. And before I pass it back over to Ellen, I wanted to share the contact information of our flood risk management specialist, senior manager, and our research scientist, Jenny Hill, and Rahana Rajabali. If there's any other questions related to their 2 teams, please feel free to reach out to them, and you can reach out to me on my contact information provided as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Eric. I'd like to invite on up to speak next.
Hey everybody, I am super excited to be here sharing this platform with such industry experts, with Nick and Eric. So as Ellen introduced me, my name is On and I'm a property insurance broker in Ontario, specifically in the GTA area, and I was previously an underwriter for the insurance companies. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll be sharing my observations with the way property insurance for the average consumer has been impacted due to water damage, the water damage claims that are on the rise. Who remembers this? I don't know about you, but I would not be abandoning my Ferrari. The story goes, in the summer of 2013, we had a thunderstorm, and the driver, who was a lawyer, abandoned this car because it got stuck in the water. It was the topic of conversation at the insurance company. I was asked that this vehicle, if written off by the insurance company, would have costed the insurance company around $200,000 alone. That's what the approximate value of the single vehicle was, of the Ferrari, not the van. Now, there's a common myth that circles insurance premiums. The reality of the situation regarding water versus fire, that fires often are the ones that cost the insurance companies the most amount in claims. The reality of the situation is that fire claims are not that common, and they're often limited to the amount of the damage to a single home or property or the adjacent homes nearby. However, water damage has become such a common claim that it has surpassed fire damage in total claims cost. Flooding is impacting homes, businesses, and automobiles. Homes need to be rebuilt, contents have to be repaired or replaced, and additional living arrangements have to be made. Automobiles may need to be repaired or replaced. Businesses will have an impact to their building, equipment, stock, and loss of revenue, and possible breaches of contracts. Now, most common water damage claims are sewer backup and overland water. Now, sewer backup is when dirty water comes back into your home through the pipes from the sewer drainage system. Think of your toilet returning back what you flushed. This can be caused by aging sewer systems that cannot handle the amount of water draining into the system. So a few months later, after the July 2013 event, insurance companies started to launch modified coverages for overland flood coverage, which generally means that a body of water overflowing so the level of water outside your home rises to a point where it starts to enter your home. Now just take a second and think about this. On this day of July 2013, the thunderstorm that took place on the late afternoon in the Toronto area, which lasted just over an hour, caused Canada's fourth most expensive insured loss ever, almost $1 billion, all from water claims. Now let's talk about stats to put things in perspective. These are from 2018 to 2019. Severe weather across Ontario has caused close to $1 billion in insured damage so far in 2018, according to the Catastrophe Indices and Quantification Inc. And insurance companies are trying to find unique ways to provide coverage and remain profitable. As these numbers show, these claims caused by water damage are becoming more and more common and more costly. There were 2 claims in April alone, the first one costing $80 million in insured damage, and the second storm costing around $220 million in insured damage. The next month there was another, which cost almost $500 million in insured damage. Then in August, which was $80 million. And the most recent that's been in the news, Hurricane Dorian, which has been so far calculated to be at $105 million in insured damage. So insurance companies are modifying their policy offerings by doing a range of the following. They're making the coverage optional, water coverage optional, so that if you don't want sewer backup or flood, you don't have to get it. They're limiting the coverage to people not on the flood line. If you're highly prone to being impacted by flood in the next storm, they won't offer you the coverage. You won't be eligible. They limit the coverage to people who've not had previous water claims. This ties into the prior. You may have had multiple water claims in this short period of time. The insurance companies may not want to offer the coverage to you at all. They may want to increase the cost of coverage or limit the amount of payout by setting a dollar limit to how much the company will pay. Also try to offer discounts to customers actively implementing risk management systems. And seventh is the increased water loss deductible. You'll often see, and if most of the participants here are going to be students, if at one point if you guys are renting out your rooms and so forth, you may be asked to buy contents insurance. When you're buying your tenant's insurance policy, if you take a look, I urge you guys to pull it up and take a look at it, you'll see at the bottom that there's a coverage called sewer backup coverage, and next to it you'll be paying a premium. And some insurance policies will also have overland water or flood coverage there as well. And you may have or you may not have selected it. I recommend to go through it and just to see how it's impacting you. Other than that, I just wanted to say thank you. I'll pass this over to Ellen.
Thank you so much, An and Eric and Nick. We now have an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions to our presenters. If you have any questions and if you haven't already, please add it to the question and answer box in the top left of your screen. So we're going to start with our first question, which is for Eric. How effective have been the bronze bullets in bringing more awareness to flood risk issues in the GTA?
I guess overall, the comment I can make on behalf of the flood risk management team is that it allows for a continuous collection of data. The bronze bullets that were mentioned were prevention and mitigation, recovery, preparedness, and response. And so the information that's gathered from that is maintaining a level of communication externally, and also being able to maintain a lot of data collection internally as these storm events happen. That information is definitely used for adjusting planning initiatives, adjusting resource allocations, and maintaining an awareness of areas of concern over time so that they don't end up becoming bigger issues long term. A lot of it is actually leading into a lot of adaptation and mitigation initiatives that the municipalities are typically doing in response to this. So being able to collect data and understanding what's happening both in real time and post-event wise, I think these are all going to be positives for the TRCA and how we work with our jurisdictional partners.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question is for An. What are some risk management tools the public can implement to reduce the cost of insurance?
Oh, great question. So there's a couple of things that the insurance company loves to give discounts on. If you've installed a backup valve in your property, that's one. If you have a sump pump, if you have a water sensor alarm, and if you have an auto shutoff valve installed on your property, those are some tools that you should look into if you haven't already, that can help mitigate the cost on the premiums for water damage.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, next question is for Eric. Why is it difficult to engage private corporations and citizens on the issues related to flood risk or stormwater management?
I think it's an ongoing battle, Ellen, in a positive way, in terms of the fact that we have a good traction with the private sector and on behalf of TRC as a larger organization in engaging private citizens. I think the issues really come down to overall acceptance of the awareness. And so a lot of the corporations that I've dealt with in the last 5.5 years have kind of just felt lucky and fortunate that they weren't impacted by the previous floods that have happened in the GTA over the last, I guess the last 10 years, just recently. And so in that, it's more not really necessarily acknowledging that the future is coming. The future has some negative kind of trending traits that are happening. and that preparedness and a willingness to kind of adapt to what needs to be done, companies really haven't acknowledged that because they missed the bullets in some of these cases. They missed a lot of these things that impacted them directly. But I know there's been a lot of research that's been done on a constituent basis from Intact Insurance, for example, where they've actually looked at this issue in recent flooding that's happened in Burlington, for example, and primary research interviews done directly with residents that were displaced or heavily impacted by the flooding that happened led to a lot of things that are similar to post-traumatic stress disorder and challenges related to financial capacity. As a small business owner, as a multinational corporation, as an employer, and as a taxpayer, all of these are relevant factors to take into account when understanding and engaging on stormwater management and flood risk mitigation issues. The issue overall, though, is not really finding full credibility or relevance to be able to really drill it down to make it something that they need to address right away. Everything has a priority, and I think the fact that they've missed a couple of instances where it negatively impacted them directly, I think a lot of the times it does get disregarded sometimes.
Thank you. Another question for you, Eric. Sorry to put you on the spot here. Why did the TRCA create the LID and Planning Design Guide Wiki?
I think it was actually a constituted effort between the three conservation authorities in the sense that they wanted to be able to share this with the industry. There's been a lot of information that the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program team has established and developed over the years, and a lot of that information was on our websites and different access points. Centralizing it in one spot made it something you can share in one link to be able to find everything and be able to search for everything. And so that effort on behalf of the industry to share best practices, to share case studies, to share current examples of installations and implementation tools to allow the industry to move forward, it kind of relates to the previous question. If you have that in hand and if it's free and readily available and it's up to date, that information now is a positive kind of engagement tool for our team at STEP, our three conservation authority partners, and the industry vendors and technology providers to engage the corporate citizens and the private citizens to be able to understand what they can actually do and what's reasonable for them. Before it was all over the place and it wasn't readily accessible, so that link now kind of serves as a centralized place for the industry to kind of benefit from as a whole.
Thank you. We have a question for Nick. Can you speak to the current trend of government research funding for universities to collaborate with industrial partners for stormwater management pilot projects?
I can take a shot. I think that, one of the challenges about, managing stormwater is the fact that it's hard to figure out exactly who owns the problem. So a lot of times it's a very large-scale problem, and having a specific industrial partner can be challenging. But there's definitely some interest in funding resiliency related projects from, in particular, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities had the Green Municipal Fund, which has been a source of funding. And also, historically, we've received a lot of funding from NSERC, and they've really recently just sort of revamped their funding programs and tried to streamline them into something called the NSERC Alliance Fund. So it's a relatively new program, which we're just sort of going through teething pains with right now. But I think that the Alliance grants would be definitely a good fund to pursue if we could connect with a strong industrial partner and then just connect them to a researcher at a university. That would be definitely worth pursuing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. So that's about all the time we have. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one more question that just came in. This is for On. So how does the insurance industry take a leadership role in this issue?
Great question. So from what I've noticed is that companies like Intact have been, from what I've understood, is that Intact's CEO Charles Brindamore has partnered up with a couple of universities in researching climate change and the impact to the insurance industry. Is from what I remember in reading articles about, and I do believe that there are other insurance companies themselves. They're, water loss being one of the more, is becoming the more common claim and the most is the claim that's costing the insurance company the biggest pretty penny. They're all trying to find ways to minimize the loss, the severity and frequency of the losses.
Thank you. So that's all the time we have left for questions. So we're just going to wrap up our webinar today by discussing a couple of the important dates for our student competition here. So in November, Ryerson University will actually be hosting our mentorship workshop, where we will be inviting industry mentors to share their knowledge and experience with the students to help make their innovative solutions realistic and scalable. The project reports are then to be submitted by January 12th at 11:59 p.m. In February, the Water Institute at the University of Waterloo will be hosting a skills development workshop. Students will be invited to participate in multiple sessions that will help develop their project pitches. And finally, on March 24th, students will be invited to Durham College to pitch their innovative solutions and prototypes to a live audience, including our industry expert judging panel. I am excited to announce that the Canadian Water Network has invited the winner of the 2020 Rain It In student competition to apply to present a poster of their innovation at CWN's Blue Cities 2020 conference. This will be from May 7th to 8th in Toronto. Posters will be presented during a dedicated evening showcase on May 7th. Blue Cities is an intimate conference that typically attracts around 200 water leaders from municipalities, industry, NGOs, and government. The event is designed to maximize networking opportunities with interactive breakout sessions, lengthy networking breaks, and an all-delegates welcome reception and blue networking, an informal event or an informal evening with Toronto's water community. Canadian Water Network also invites all participants of Rain It In to apply for the Water Leaders of Tomorrow program. The Water Leaders of Tomorrow program launched in 2019 to engage the next generation in strategic conversations with senior leaders from across the globe. 9 young people were awarded complimentary registration, accommodation, and travel support to attend Blue Cities 2019. The participants were paired with a seasoned mentor, a conference speaker or delegate to enhance their experience. Here are some photos of the recipients and their mentors. This year's application will close in March 2020. For more details, including program opening, please subscribe to Canadian Water Network's mailing list. Thank you for your time today. A recording of the webinar will be made available to you in about a week.